Ladies and gentlemen, this is such an amusing, such an interesting headline. Trump denies Minnesota governor's request for $500 million to repair damage. I'll just use from peaceful protests. This is not exactly the title on the Washington Examiner, but I'll read you. President Trump has denied a request from Minnesota's governor for money to rebuild parts of Minneapolis that were destroyed. Quote, the governor is disappointed that the federal government declined his request for financial support, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz's office said in a statement. As we, quote, as we navigate one of the most difficult periods in our state's history, we look for support from our federal government to help us through. But I thought the federal government was run by a monster, a madman. Why would you want support from Trump? I mean, the Democrats are boycotting Goya, the best food company on the planet, one of the best food companies in the country and in the world. But so you boycott Goya. So you boycott all the delicious and tasty and wonderful products from just an amazing company. But then you ask for $500 million, $500 million. Now, the vast majority of protests were peaceful, but there was $1.4 billion in property damage. Now, if Minnesota has $500 million, it might be over because there was 25 cities. There were curfews and lockdowns throughout the country because everything was quite peaceful. So, $500 million to repair damage. Over half of all the cases and all the lives lost from the pandemic are in New York, New Jersey, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Illinois. So that we don't need to go into the way Democratic states are mismanaged. But this is interesting. If the federal government, so at least one Republican in the state had lobbied. Okay, so Walz, a Democrat, requested that Trump declare Minnesota a major disaster zone in request to the Federal Emergency Management Agency on July 2nd after more than 1,500 buildings were damaged. 1,500 buildings were damaged, over $500 million in damages. Ladies and gentlemen, President Trump, I believe, is going to win Minnesota. That's 10 electoral college votes. President Trump is going to have a decisive victory. He'll have a victory in the electoral college. Could be decisive. I think I'm leaning towards it being decisive. And they don't have any room. Their margin for error is, they have no margin for error in the electoral college. And if they lose the popular vote, they're done as a political party. The only thing they've had is the popular vote. But here, we have a very interesting dynamic at play. It's kind of like this is just hilarious. Great news. Okay, so this is from Representative Jeff Duncan. Great news. President Trump has denied Minnesota's disaster request to repair $500 million in damages. Governors and mayors who ordered police to stand down and watch their cities burn shouldn't get a penny in tax dollar aid. You know, this all happened in Minneapolis. Amy Klobuchar is nowhere to be found. Isn't that interesting how media and Democrats just have nothing to ask Amy Klobuchar, certainly nothing to ask the governor Walz. They don't focus on the $500 million in property damage and the 1,500 buildings that were damaged. And then you get articles like the article in USA Today, which is Trump. Okay, so there's one. So this is a Twin Cities article. Fed denies Minnesota request for aid. Walz has 30. Okay, so there's one that's Fed denies Minnesota request for aid to rebuild. Rebuild from what? Everything was peaceful. So you have a situation, ladies and gentlemen, where, and you see this with J.K. Rowling, and you see this with that pathetic letter that they wrote. President Trump has won the election. Okay, it's going to be against Hillary Clinton. If you want to be part of a newsletter, send me an email at contactgoodman78@gmail.com. So contactgoodman78@gmail.com to be part of my newsletters that are coming up. And if you want to support my voice long-term, people, going into November 3rd, your support via Patreon is extremely important. And to my new patrons, thank you so very much. Your support via the Super Chat on my live streams and Patreon especially allows me to do what I do. So thank you. The link is below. Share my Huffington Post article, Hillary Clinton 2020 is a reality. Get ready for 8 years of Trump. And share my Times of Israel article, Hillary Clinton, not Biden, will be nominee. I also have some wonderful Jerusalem Post op-eds. Share those. One is about AOC. One is about the Democratic Party. Ladies and gentlemen, that's below in the pinned comment. Ladies and gentlemen, I was the biggest Bernie Sanders booster on the internet, according to the Huffington Post. This was in 2016. The unofficial scribe of Sanders' most hardcore voters, according to the Washington Post. The Washington Post link and the Huffington Post links are below. My writing and the Huffington Post, the Hill Salon, all of those places, publications are below. Okay? I'm telling you, the Democratic Party, the pledged delegates don't need to vote for Biden. They're not legally bound to vote for the winner of the primary. The primary is, they don't even need a primary. Three very courageous people, Nico House, Jared Beck, and Elizabeth Beck, waged the DNC fraud lawsuit while nobody on the left even lifted a finger to go after the Democratic Party. They did. The DNC lawyer, one of the DNC lawyers stated, they don't even, it's a private entity, which means that the United States government should never have gone to bat for the DNC. It was never national security, even if they were hacked, which James Clapper is only moderately the highly confident, and CrowdStrike's CEO has no concrete evidence. But anyway, that's another story. Trump never worked with Russia. The whole thing was fabricated and set up. But you know what? The Matrix, they live within a matrix. And that matrix is going to completely shut down on November 3rd. President Trump's going to win. If you look, $500 million that Minnesota's governor wants from the federal government. How do they boycott Goya, but then ask Trump for $500 million because of peaceful protest? Most of the protests were peaceful. Unfortunately, there was an element, who knows who's at fault, but there was an element that there were people who were not peaceful, and there were people who caused $1.4 billion of property damage, and there were 10,000 arrests throughout the country. This is not Trump's fault. The Democratic Party utilizes the unrest under the guise that it really cares about justice. George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis. Democratic-run city. Democratic-run state. Eric Garner was murdered in 2014. President Obama was in the Oval Office. You still had de Blasio there. You had the same governor of New York. You had the same, Gillibrand was there. You had the same, Schumer was there. Democrats did nothing. And they campaign and they run on the pain and tragedy of people who've suffered from brutality. Police brutality exists. It is something that has to be addressed. But you don't bulldoze hospitals because doctors engage in malpractice. You don't level schools because there are bad teachers. You don't. These things have to be dealt with. But $1.4 billion in property damage, burning down, police stations and taking over city blocks. This is only helping Trump. The left is not very good at politics. Now, you have people on the left who really think that Biden's going to be nominee. Biden's not going to be nominee. There's no way. There's no way he's going to be nominee. I will have made the biggest political call of all time. Hillary Clinton, I'm not a fan, but has the gravitas, can stand up to President Trump in debates. She has the money. She has access to all the money. She's articulate, much more so than Biden. She has charisma, kind of like, Darth Vader and Cobra Commander and the Decepticons and whatever. She has a kind of like, she has almost a cartoonish charisma, okay, that is intimidating, yet it's a bizarre thing where they worship her on the left. See, the left thinks that people worship Trump. No, I'm a Trump supporter. We don't worship President Trump. He's just a great president. Signed the First Step Act, signed an executive order combating rampant anti-Semitism. Sorry, you can't equate the only Jewish state to things I can't talk about on YouTube. And if you do, you're lacking brain cells and you're a fool. The left is composed of people who are now going after Harry Potter. Okay? So they're not all together there. And it's like the French Revolution of ideas on the left. The same people, they tried to use the guillotine for their adversaries, and now the guillotine's being used, the proverbial or the literary or the ideological guillotines are being used against them. You see what happens in Minnesota. You see what happens throughout the country. You see, by the way, the lives lost, children losing their lives. There have been since George Floyd was murdered, and he was. I support law enforcement, and I support, people who risk their lives every day, but George Floyd was murdered by a very corrupt, very bad person with a badge, an officer. I don't even want to call him an officer, but he was murdered. You can't do that. And I think that the officers who murdered Eric Garner, that they should have been charged, but they weren't. But these things have to be addressed and dealt with. But the Democratic Party, what they do, 3 days before the tragedy in Minneapolis, you had Joe Biden saying that you ain't black if you don't vote for him. If you have a problem deciding who you're voting for. So he was trying to tank his campaign then. And you think that he's so he lacks the intelligence or the savvy or the wisdom or the understanding of politics to know that he can't say. Then he was looking into the mirror and he was smiling. Go look at the Charlemagne video. Go look at the Charlemagne video and you tell me if he wasn't planning that. Of course he was. It wasn't impromptu. Nothing that Biden does is impromptu. If it's impromptu and if it's like spur of the moment, he's like all over the place and he's meandering off into some bizarre story. But that was a way to tank his campaign. Hillary Clinton is the only chance they have. The problem is they don't have enough. And they're going to, they have enough people to make it competitive. She could possibly win if President Trump falls into a trap like Twitter. He needs to calm down. And I've never been a critique of President Trump, but very rarely on Twitter. This is like, Twitter could make or break President Trump's election if he retweets or says something absurd that they consider absurd, especially. Because generally what they do is they take his quote and then they create subtext that replaces the actual text. So President Trump has to calm down on Twitter, and he has to be strategic. He can't get into social media beefs with female politicians on the left. He can't, aside from Clinton. And if it's Elizabeth Warren, then yes. Because the left doesn't like Bernie Sanders supporters can't stand Elizabeth Warren. I know, I used to be a Bernie Sanders supporter. Oh, thanks, Elizabeth, for your wonderful endorsement in 2016. Oh, that's right. You said that I told you that a woman can't become president. That's absurd. She made up a story about Bernie Sanders, and then Bernie Sanders tanked his campaign, and now he's working to help Biden, who would veto Medicare for all. That's the left. Did you know, by the way, that Bernie Sanders and Max Boot and Bill Kristol are voting for the same candidate? Did you know that Noam Chomsky, for example, who's being shunned by the left, which is hilarious, along with J.K. Rowling and others, did you know that Noam Chomsky was made a great many good points, relevant points about the Vietnam War, that we should have never gotten in, and it's true. That was the first major counterinsurgency conflict, and then followed by Bush's quagmires. And but now he's actually voting for he's voting for the same candidate that Bush neoconservatives are voting for, the same interventionists. So Democrats have gone from intervention to now anything goes as long as you address climate change, which they haven't. I want to know what bill in the House was passed to address climate change. Don't tell me the Green New Deal resolution, because look up what a resolution is. It's a resolution. It's not. It's a public relations stunt. They voted on it in the Senate, and some Democrats voted against it. Most were like absent, or like they voted present. So President Trump has won Minnesota. You can't go into the election with cities being torn down, Democratic-run cities, and expect turnout and expect people. I mean, there's only so much contempt for Trump. You can't achieve great things in life purely on contempt and anger and frustration and being scorned. There has to be positivity. When President Trump speaks, his speeches, people are laughing, people are smiling, people are energized, they're pumped up. He has definitely a charisma that he has something that Bernie Sanders had. Well, I should say, but this is actually, he is going up against James Comey. He is signing a deal. So he's going up against corrupt intelligence officials. Bernie Sanders basically embraced their rear end. Oh, yeah, it's too bad that Trump worked with Russia. And that went back to him and Tulsi Gabbard and Jill Stein. You don't expect Bernie Sanders to stick up for you, especially if you gave $200 million in your voters and you gave more money. He's got a small favor to ask of you. Give me another dollar so I can give it to Biden so he can then give it to Hillary Clinton. But Trump is the real deal. That's why the media and liberals and oh my God, they're apoplectic, hysterical, fuming, maniacal, rabid, fanatical. They're just, it's almost as if Trump was Bush and got us into never-ending counterinsurgency conflicts. So that's right, they don't care. They don't care at all. It's his personality. The only thing they have against Trump is his personality. That's it. You want to talk every single topic from immigration to foreign policy, President Trump is either the same as President Obama or much better. Almost the same as President Obama or much better, especially in terms of foreign policy from a liberal perspective. But anyway, we had record low unemployment prior to the pandemic. President Trump pretty much has won Minnesota, I think. I think that he's won Minnesota. That's 10 electoral college votes. If he wins Minnesota and everything remains the same, and he wins Ohio and Florida, he doesn't need Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Look it up. Go to 270 to win. Play with the electoral college map. If he wins Minnesota, they can win Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan as long as he wins Ohio and Florida. So, ladies and gentlemen, November 3rd's going to be a rude awakening. Remember Rick Rude and WWF? Rude awakening. They are not going to win the election. And they think they've done the same thing all over again. They're arrogant. They're a bunch of narcissists and they're so egotistical. They think they're going to win. They're not. Give me your thoughts below. Subscribe to H.A. Goodman's other channel right now. He's won Minnesota, especially with this. They want $500 million for 1,000, over 1,500 buildings that were leveled by peaceful protests. But anyway, yeah, give me your thoughts below. Subscribe to H.A. Goodman's other channel. My Patreon link is below if you want to support my voice long term. Your support is greatly appreciated. It allows me to do what I do. Thank you so much, everybody. Subscribe to H.A. Goodman's other channel. This is the place to be. Clinton's going to be nominee. I will have made the biggest political call of all time. Tell everybody you know that Clinton's going to be nominee, because it ain't going to be Biden. Give me your thoughts.